Hello, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America, and today I am joined by my two favorite historians. Eric K. Washington, sitting with me here, is the author of the acclaimed biography, Boss of the Grips, The Life of James H. Williams and the Redcaps of Grand Central Terminal. You'll love that story. And we are also joined by Zoom because she is traveling like crazy all over the globe, historian and author A'Lelia Bundles, whose latest book, Joy Goddess, A'Lelia Walker and the Harlem Renaissance. It highlights the life of her great-grandmother, A'Lelia Walker, who was the daughter of her great-great-grandmother, Madam C.J. Walker, America's first self-made female millionaire. And we welcome you both to Black America. It is fantastic to have you. And because I've been stalking you all, you've been doing the talk circuit so well, you know, where you mesh, you talk about your books, you talk about your people, your research and all of that. So I am delighted to have you both together to talk about, really, A'Lelia, and I should say about A'Lelia too, you're looking now at the former trustee of Columbia University, the Library of Congress, and a news person. We know each other from, I don't want to say exactly the early days of news, Eric, but at any rate, A'Lelia, thanks so much. The books, both of your books are fantastic. Let's start talking about preserving Black history, which is what you both do in a very, very entertaining as well as engrossing way. So, A'Lelia, let's start with you. We know that you did the story first of Madam C.J. Walker, and you were a guest for Black America when we did our special on the African American Museum because you donated some of your great-great-grandma. I keep getting the greats,
Right.
I'm not saying enough of the greats, but Madam C.J. Walker's things to the Smithsonian. So talk about first, let's start, how important it is right now to be preserving our history.
Well, especially right now when we know that so many people don't want us to tell our history, but we're going to tell our history. And like you, who also has a family with a very interesting history, and like you, I became a journalist, but that really interesting family story had not been told because there were very few books being published, not being written, but being published about and by African Americans. And so it really takes us to try to retrieve that history. And fortunately for me, with Madam C.J. Walker and A'Lelia Walker, I have lots of letters, and I was able to interview some people who knew them when I began this research in the 70s and 80s. But it really is important that we tell our stories because no one else is going to tell them in the way that we can.
Right, right. And so you have, as you say, your family never threw one thing away. So you had hundreds of letters and all of that history. Eric, in your book, you met James Williams totally by mistake, in a way.
Yes, I was asked to do a tour of Grand Central Terminal for the centennial in 2013, and I wanted to write something, but not about the architecture because everybody would be focusing on that. So I knew I'm not a railroad enthusiast, wasn't at the time, maybe I am a little bit more now, but I knew there was a history of African Americans in the railroad, so I started doing a little digging, and I hit pay dirt because I became quickly aware of how important Grand Central Terminal was in the railroad system. And there was this Black porter, the chief porter named James H. Williams, who was the first to integrate what had been an all-white red cap system that had been started 8 years ago.
Many of our younger viewers may not know really who red caps.
Yeah, that's right, I forget.
The importance of all of that, not only handling the luggage of the wealthier passengers who were traveling, but really sort of as guides to Black Americans who were in the midst of migrating across the country.
Exactly. So the red caps were, it was the lowest echelon of public service in the railroad. And they were tasked to carry everybody else's bags, but also to be walking encyclopedias, as they were often described, who had to know at the drop of a question, not only where your track was, but how do I get from here to this Broadway theater or to this particular hotel, or where's a good place to, where I can eat or freshen up between changing trains or whatever. So they were essential to that Swiss watch precision that Grand Central Terminal was so proud of. And so my guy, turned out he was the first, he started in 1903 when they broke ground for the terminal. And within a year, it was almost entirely a black system.
So he was the first, became the chief, and then it became an all-black service, but extraordinarily well respected. If you were a red cap, working on the trains and all.
Exactly. So these were jobs like the Pullman porters because they were steady, because you interacted with a lot of people, but they were also essential. And one of the things that was particularly interesting about him, was that he hired particularly, not exclusively, but particularly young black college men who would come from up and down the eastern seaboard during breaks, because like any college student, you need some side job, to defray your school costs. And they were often on PhD tracks, and they were, doctors, lawyers, clerics, linguists, artists, actors, throughout the professional spectrum.
Well, it's a fabulous book. Now, for something completely different in a way, Alelia, talk to us about your great-grandmother, who was the socialite of the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, it's such an extremely interesting story with, a fabulous now landmarked residence, in Westchester and. The Dark Tower. Tell us about it.
Yes, definitely the Harlem Renaissance. It was the magical period when Harlem was the black cultural and political mecca. And because that little world was so small, of course, Alelia Walker knew Williams, and that everybody sort of interacted with each other. But Alelia Walker, only daughter of Madam C.J. Walker, the early 20th century hair care entrepreneur, persuaded her mother that they needed to have a presence in Harlem. And so they bought a building in 1913 on 136th Street, where the Countee Cullen Library is now located. Unfortunately, that building is gone. But that became the center for a lot of wonderful parties, but also was the beauty salon. The Walker Beauty Salon. And then in 1927, Alelia Walker converted a floor of the house into what became known as the Dark Tower. It was a cultural space where the artists and writers and musicians and actors would gather, and where other people would come. So they would meet them, they would have poetry readings, receptions, wedding receptions, parties. And it really became an iconic space during the Harlem Renaissance.
Right, and she traveled the world as well. Talk to us a little bit about that. Her itinerary is like to die for.
Yes, Alelia Walker was an international traveler, and part of my discovery as I was doing research on her was first finding that the people had written about her a little bit, but they kind of caricatured her and sort of made her off as kind of a ditzy socialite almost. But what I discovered is how critical she was to the Harlem Renaissance, to the cultural scene, but also what an international traveler she was. In 1921, she sailed in first class on the SS Paris from New York to France, then spent a month or so in Paris, where she hung out with her friends who were musicians and other cultural people, and then went to Nice, Monte Carlo, Rome, Cairo, Addis Ababa, Palestine, and then came back through London. And in the meantime was expanding her circle of friends into a much more international group. So when those people would come to New York, they would come to her homes, or they would say to their friends, "You have to meet Alelia Walker." So that gave her more of an international circle.
Right. And so the family business continued. I mean, I was looking at the timeline and all of the Alelias, in your family. You were named for her. I didn't realize your mom too had the name Alelia, and
yes, 3 Alelias in my family.
3 Alelias.
My grandmother's name was May, but my mother's name was Alelia May, and then I'm Alelia.
And I understand that it was the A'Lelia Walker who added the to Lelia. Is that,
That is true. After she came back from that international trip, she was also going through a divorce. I think she was trying to transform herself, and a name change was something that she just decided she would do. And so she added this A apostrophe to her birth name, Lelia.
And that's how you came to begin writing these family histories. You know, the first book about Madam C.J. Walker, it was made into I believe it was Netflix, a movie.
Netflix, right?
You know, and introduced to a much wider audience. But you originally wanted to write about A'Lelia Walker.
That is true. So when I was growing up, my mother was vice president of the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company. But my real passion was writing, and my parents were wise enough not to say, you have to go do this. You can do the thing that you love. And when I was in graduate school at Columbia, Phyllis Garland, the only Black woman on the faculty at the time in the fall of 1975, you know, ancient history, recognized the spelling of my name. And she said, your name is A'Lelia. Do you have any connection to Madam Walker and A'Lelia Walker? And so I wasn't telling people that, but she said, that's what you're going to write your paper about. In high school, I had written a report about A'Lelia Walker and the Harlem Renaissance because in some ways, she was the one who was more interesting to me. I know that sounds strange to people because Madam Walker, of course, is the famous millionaire, philanthropist, and entrepreneur. But I was fascinated by A'Lelia Walker because in 1969 and 70, when I was in high school, I was just beginning to discover Black writers like Jean Toomer and Langston Hughes. She had known them, and so she was the one who fascinated me.
So you got to write, the one that sparked you in the beginning. And now A'Lelia said that the original A'Lelia and James Williams knew each other.
Yes, indeed. At the famous $1 million wedding of A'Lelia Walker's daughter, there were 3 flower girls who what were they, maybe 3, 4, 5 years old?
Right.
And one of the 3 was Kate Williams, who was James H. Williams' youngest daughter. And she's in the photo. A'Lelia was kind enough to let me use it in my book, and it's in her book as well. But there were other occasions where a lot of the people who would attend gatherings at A'Lelia Walker's would also attend gatherings that James H. Williams and the Red Caps would sponsor, like moonlight sails up the Hudson with orchestras. He had organized a Red Cap orchestra of Grand Central Terminal. He organized a baseball team. So a lot of the crowds were the same crowds that partook in social events of both figures.
Right, and he became a labor, what we would call a labor leader, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was a different kind of labor leader than, say, A. Philip Randolph with the Pullman Porters. With the Red Caps, a lot of the things that the Pullman Porters were pulling for, like collective bargaining and those sort of things, it was a different kind of struggle for the Red Caps when they started. They did organize later on,
right. But
basically for him, it was getting in the door. That was really the initiative of getting their foot in the door, and then you could do other things, you know. So, because he was management, technically.
Right.
But he was very sympathetic management, and it was said that he would be discouraged when he found Red Caps were there who had these degrees and they were still doing this, like, what's he still doing here? You know, he should be.
Right.
Of course, it was a struggle for people often to get out, to be hired, even with their degrees. But he was very active and he was very influential. His assistant chief Red Cap became New York City's first Black policeman, Samuel Jesse Battles. His own son, who had been a Red Cap, among other things, but not at Grand Central, at Penn Station, became Manhattan's first Black fireman,
Nice.
And then all of New York City's first Black fire officer, with his successive promotions as lieutenant captain, battalion chief.
Right. So I know you didn't have closets full of photographs and letters as A'Lelia had, but you lucked out in that because the book is full of these wonderful, I love that the Williams family appreciated posed, family portraits. They're gorgeous.
Yeah, well, it was different. It wasn't the whole family. It was one family member who had become the repository for things photographic, and there weren't many documents, but he had a pile of photos. And he had written his own book about his grandfather, James Williams' son, Wesley Williams, who was the fireman. And I was concerned. I thought, maybe he's planning. He said, I'm not planning to write about my great-grandfather. So he gave me carte blanche. And I went up to his house in Connecticut with my portable scanner and scanned almost all of his collected photographs. And then I was able to identify a lot of the people who he recognized. He knew who they were, but he didn't know the context. And I was able, through research, to establish, this was in Asbury Park.
Right.
That building was there. This was undoubtedly wintertime, even though they're standing on the beach because they're wearing fur coats,
My kids like to do that too.
Yeah,
Go to the beach in the middle of winter. It escapes but at any rate, they love it. I want to get to A'Lelia because I love it when you give the lesson on how to do the research, because everybody who's out there wants to do the same thing. So give us your, narrowed. I love every single detail because it makes sense. I don't know how many times I've made those notes. Yeah, do that. So
the headlines. So I have an overwhelming amount of material. Most people do not, but Eric was very lucky to come upon that trove. My family saved everything. I could say they were archivists or I could say they were pack rats, but because they saved everything, it allowed me to have details. And I got this great piece of advice from Alex Haley, who at one point wanted to write about Madam Walker, but I was doing the research, and he said to me, make a folder for every year of your character's life. And so I did that, and now I have 2 rooms worth of research with those folders that started in the 1980s when I was really starting this. Then I made a folder for every character because, now there are 1,000 people who interacted with A'Lelia Walker and Madam Walker. There's no way I could remember all of them, but now I can just go pull the folder and all of the things that I've dropped into that folder through the years. Organizations, NAACP, National Association of Colored Women, particular events, the Tulsa riot. So I have a full filing system with all of those materials. Now, today, if someone's starting out, they would probably digitize all those things. Those things I have as paper, but whatever you do, it is just so necessary to have a system so that you're not just going through the piles and trying to figure out where the heck that piece of paper is.
Right. Now, I saw you all early in 2025 in Montgomery, Alabama, which is my home, and you all were there for the Black Bio meeting, which is the first time that many Black biographers had been gathered in, 60 years?
Something like I think it was 46 years. 40-something years. It was like 1986 there had been a gathering in New York.
It was really, A'Lelia was the guest speaker, and Nell Painter was there. It was just amazing. And now you have decided, you're both on the board of the Biographers International Organization, which is BIO. Talk to us about the effort to make sure that Black biographers are actually dealt with, in terms of giving them resources and information.
So there are a couple of things that the organization did. I'm losing track of time. So we're in 2021, we initiated a fellowship, which I chair, the Francis Frank Rolland Fellowship. And Francis Frank Rolland was one of the earliest known African Americans to write a book-length biography. She's also the mother of Lee Whipper, if there are any cinema buffs, who lived to almost 100 years old. He's born 1876 and he died, I think, in 1975 or something. But we named it after her, and we started out by giving, for a biography in progress at any stage of research or halfway through, almost finished, just before publication, $2,000 for the first 2 years. And then Kitty Kelly gave us $50,000, and we were able to enlarge it to 2 people and to $5,000 each. So.
And A'Lelia, you're involved in actually mentoring all of these would-be biographers, and some who've had books published but look to you, as sort of the leader of the pack. Talk to us about, what you hope to accomplish with this new
this
piece
is a
of
really wonderful organization. It includes Pulitzer Prize winners and people who are just thinking about writing biographies. Very welcoming, and so a wide range of people come together every year at an annual conference. This conference in Montgomery, as you said, was the first major Black biography conference in decades. And one of the bonuses for me, and now having written the books on Madam Walker and A'Lelia Walker, is that I have developed, I think, some experience and I hope some wisdom. And I just feel like it's my role in life to encourage other people to tell their stories. And people think, oh, my family member is not famous or not as famous as Madam Walker, who cares? But our stories are important, all of our stories, because they put together this tapestry of who we are as Black Americans and who we are as Americans. So I'm always available for, whatever coaching and encouragement I can give.
Right. And the great Rachel Swarns, who is also a guest here, is now leading this monthly meeting.
Right. Rachel was our inaugural winner of the Francis Rollin Prize, and she and Emily Bernard, who was working on a biography of Nella Larson, they were at the conference in Montgomery, and they were inspired to start this Black biography roundtable.
Right.
And
believe me, I peek in. I go, it's just fascinating, as writers talk about being in progress and how they, found pieces of research. One of the writers who spoke the last time, I think, is in Iceland now, doing.
Eveline Whitmire, whose book is coming out in a few weeks. It's been fascinating, just with the Rollin Prize, because we get, obviously not everybody wins, but we see the wide scope, the array of people of interest, some of whom we knew something about, some of whom we never heard anything about. So there's so many stories out there. And I know when we started, I thought, how many applications will we expect? And I thought, well, if we get 15, that's nice. And we got about 50,
50, so that is terrific. Now, you all also work together at Woodlawn Cemetery. Talk to us about, I see you all everywhere. I get the notification.
Yeah.
A'Lelia and Eric are going to be at Woodlawn Cemetery.
Yeah. But we don't live there yet. But
A'Lelia, talk to us about what you and Eric are doing.
Literally, the plot thickens, right?
Right. So Eric and I both have been very involved at Woodlawn, and I ended up becoming an advisory board member several years ago because Madam Walker and A'Lelia Walker are buried there. And Susan Olson, who was the historian, sort of roped me in. And I began to learn more about it. And then Eric and I did a program together because he's so great at giving tours. And he's been involved for many years. And now Woodlawn is one of the cemeteries that was never segregated. Black people have been buried at Woodlawn since the late 1800s. And there is an amazing set of folks, whether it's Celia Cruz or Duke Ellington or Miles Davis or Cicely Tyson. So there are lots of stories to be told. And Eric is now spearheading a project where he dives more deeply into that.
Well, that's a great choice of words, Eric. I don't know whether you want to dive too deeply.
No, it's been fascinating because Woodlawn has been known, for years as having this outstanding, and if I could use the word collection, in air quotes, of famous people,
right.
Most of whom are associated with the entertainment industry, who obviously will attract the most attention. Duke Ellington, Miles Davis, Illinois Jacquet, Celia Cruz, but they were very inspired by both of our books, according to them. They made them, just going to the index and say, oh my God, we have this person, we have this person, we have this person. Right. They're not entertainment people. They're doctors, lawyers, or whatever. And some we don't know. We need somebody to, to kind of dig them up. To see I didn't.
Yes,
that wasn't the phrase I meant to use.
Right. You
no,
and A'Lelia having so much
the
fun.
English language.
As much fun as I have, and I say next appearance, Woodlawn Cemetery for these two.
We're not exhuming them other than through research.
We only have. I'd love to have you back. We only have a couple of minutes left, but in terms of what's next, A'Lelia, What's next for you? I know you've hired somebody to come clear out all of that paper.
Right, to read the clutter. You know, I am really, of course, I would love to do a Netflix series or a film or musical or stage play. So I want to put this book, Joy Goddess, onto another platform. And then I'm just going to continue to, try to mentor other people who are interested in biography. Biography is so important for us as people to understand who our ancestors are and to push forward for the future generations.
Well, great, great. I'm so happy you're doing that. And Eric, Alelia mentioned that you're a tour guide as well in the Harlem area as well as...
Yeah, I'm doing less of that because I'm actually working on two other biographies, both of which came out of Boss of the Grips. One is about a Harlem actor from the Harlem Renaissance who was a red cap when he came to New York. And the other is a group biography centered around Colored School Number 4, which was recently landmarked in Chelsea, where James H. Williams had attended school in the 1880s and 1890s.
Wow, wow. So it just keeps revealing itself, you know. Well, for both of you, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm returned to my, expecting you to show up somewhere on the globe talking about Alelia Walker and James Williams. But thank you for the excellent, excellent work. My two favorite historians, authors Eric K. Washington, whose book is Boss of the Grips, The Life of James H. Williams and the Redcaps of Grand Central Terminal, and Alelia Bundles, the author of Joy Goddess, Alelia Walker and the Harlem Renaissance. Thank you both so much for the work you're doing and for being such terrific people, and I will continue stalking you.
Thank you.
Love you, Carol.
And for our audience out there, thank you. That is all for us today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America, and we'll see you the next time. Thank you both.